The birth of Commodus was announced with trumpets that rang through the marble halls of the Palatine, their echoes bouncing off statues of gods and ancestors. Rome rejoiced, the people flooding the streets with garlands and songs, declaring the arrival of a child touched by divinity, the son of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-king whose wisdom had guided the empire through storms of war and unrest. In the imperial chambers, servants whispered prayers, and senators bowed stiffly, their eyes flicking toward the cradle, as if the infant might already judge their loyalty. Yet beneath the splendor, the young Commodus was born into shadows. From his earliest days, he sensed the contradiction of his world. Tutors praised virtue while plotting their own advancement. Senators smiled in feigned devotion while whispering doubts behind closed doors. Marcus Aurelius, ever patient, tried to instill discipline, teaching the boy that power carried a weight measured not in glory, but in restraint. But Commodus, with eyes wide and calculating, absorbed more than lessons. He watched. He noticed how fear bent men's knees faster than reason, how applause inflamed desire more than wisdom. By the time he could walk the marble corridors, Commodus had begun to understand the game he was born into. A tutor scolded him for boasting of small accomplishments. He smiled politely, then practiced charm that could sway even the coldest critic. A senator doubted his intellect. Commodus filed the slight away like a blade hidden for later. And in the quiet hours, when the palace slept under the silver gaze of the moon, he dreamed not of philosophy or peace, but of power, adoration, and conquest. Even Marcus Aurelius could not conceal the cracks he saw forming in his son. At moments, his gaze lingered on Commodus with worry, noting the boy's hunger for recognition, the impatience that simmered beneath the surface. Rumors began to drift through the halls, the emperor questioning his own heir, fearing that the child might become a tyrant rather than a savior. These whispers reached Commodus's ears, sharp and intoxicating. It was then that ambition fully took root. If the emperor and his tutors doubted him, if Rome itself demanded perfection he did not yet possess, then he would force the world to bend to his will. Not for honor or virtue, but for glory. Not for the applause of the gods, but for the worship of men. Every whispered slight, every hidden glance, every veiled doubt became fuel. And in those early years, Commodus vowed silently, fiercely, he would prove Rome wrong. And if the gods themselves opposed him, he would defy them too. In the marble glow of the palace, a child who should have been innocent began to sharpen himself like a blade, ready to carve a legacy written in both awe and fear. Rome had welcomed its golden heir, but even in infancy, the shadows that would define his reign already circled close. The news reached Rome like a thunderclap. Marcus Aurelius was dead. Whispers spread faster than fire through the marble streets. Some claimed disease had claimed him on a distant battlefield. Others dared to speak the unthinkable poison. The truth, as always, remained hidden behind layers of loyalty, fear, and rumor. Commodus returned to the capital, a young emperor crowned not by triumph, but by grief and suspicion. His mother's tears had long since dried, leaving only the cold etiquette of mourning. Senators bowed with practiced solemnity, their smiles taut with tension, while generals observed him with veiled contempt, testing whether the boy could bear the weight of empire. Every eye that followed him seemed to measure not his inheritance, but his weakness, daring him to fail. Yet Commodus moved among them with a calm that belied the storm inside. He offered the perfunctory gestures of grief. Lowered eyes, folded hands, muted words, but behind the polite mask, his mind raced. The boy who once craved applause now craved power. His father's death was no longer simply sorrow. It was opportunity, a gateway to the throne that Rome itself seemed to doubt he deserved. Even as the people mourned, Commodus felt the whisper of guilt like a shadow at his shoulder. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-king, had been a man of virtue, a ruler who measured justice and mercy above ambition. Now, in the echoing halls of the palace, the young emperor faced the impossible question. Could he honor the father he had both loved and envied, or would he become the ruler the empire truly feared? The Senate, hesitant and shrewd, probed his resolve. One by one, they tested him with petitions, arguments, and subtle threats, watching for a tremor in his voice, a falter in his step. The legions, equally wary, demanded displays of strength, proof that Rome had not traded a philosopher for a child. Commodus, though, met them all with a smile that was equal parts charm and calculation, a mask that suggested serenity, while his mind plotted strategy. Every whispered doubt became a spark in his growing ambition, every gaze of skepticism, a challenge to conquer. And yet, in the quiet of his private chambers, he allowed himself a fleeting moment of reflection. His father's absence was a wound, raw and intimate, and for the first time, Commodus understood the precarious balance of love and fear that shaped a ruler. The shadow of guilt would follow him like a specter, a constant reminder that the path he walked, from the cradle of adoration to the throne of power, was lined with both loyalty and betrayal. By nightfall, Commodus had resolved himself. He would not merely inherit Rome, he would reshape it. He would stand in the glare of scrutiny, command obedience, and carve a legacy that would eclipse whispers of doubt. The empire awaited, and its new emperor, both grieving son and calculating ruler, was ready to seize it. Rome had expected an emperor who would sit behind a marble desk, decree laws, and command respect through tradition. Commodus gave them something far different. He descended into the arena, not cloaked in imperial robes but in armor that gleamed like sunlight on blood-stained sand. The people gasped, some in awe, others in disbelief, as the son of Marcus Aurelius revealed himself not as ruler of Rome, but as its champion and its gladiator. The Colosseum, usually a stage for controlled spectacle, became his proving ground. Each fight was more than a contest of strength. It was a demonstration of will, a performance that blurred the line between ruler and warrior. He craved the roar of the crowd, their fervor feeding a fire that no Senate debate could ignite. For the first time, Commodus felt the intoxicating power of love, the love of a people who cheered not out of fear, but adoration. And yet, for all the applause, the elite recoiled. Senators whispered, generals scowled, and philosophers shook their heads. This was not the measured, disciplined ruler they had envisioned, but in the sand, a bond formed, unexpected and unshakable. A gladiator, seasoned and scarred, watched Commodus not merely as a performer, but as a man teetering between brilliance and madness. Trust was forged in the clash of steel, in silent understanding, in the recognition of ambition mirrored in another's eyes. This man became confidant, protector, and mirror, reflecting both the emperor's desires and his vulnerabilities. Yet even as this bond deepened, Commodus could feel the edges of betrayal closing in, like shadows that crept along the walls of the palace. Every victory heightened his fame and increased the number of eyes watching him with envy and malice. Senators feared his popularity, plotting subtle manipulations. Generals questioned his strategy, whispering discontent among the troops. And the city, intoxicated by spectacle, was blind to the tension rising behind the marble pillars. The arena became both a stage and a shield, a place where Commodus could display dominance and mask doubt, even as the empire teetered between adoration and revolt. In private chambers, he allowed himself reflection, brief and sharp. Each fight was a performance of power, yes, but also a rehearsal for the intricate game of politics. Every cheer, every defeated opponent, became a note in a symphony of control that only he could conduct. He was no longer merely a ruler in title. He was Rome's spectacle, its gladiator, and its enigma. And yet, beneath the armor, beneath the sand and applause, the seeds of paranoia took root. Allies might not be loyal, friends might not be true, and enemies, hidden behind smiles and veiled glances, waited patiently for a misstep. Commodus knew. In the arena and in the palace, the line between life and death, between loyalty and betrayal, was as thin as the edge of a gladius. Rome was no longer simply an empire. It had become a stage for treachery. Commodus, once adored as a godlike figure in the Colosseum, now found himself ensnared in a web of conspiracies that threatened to unravel everything he had fought to achieve. Behind the gilded curtains of the palace, whispers grew louder, sharper plots layered upon plots, each designed to test his vigilance and his ruthlessness. His sister, Lucilla, moved like a shadow among the senators, her smiles concealing ambition sharper than any blade. Every casual glance and half-whispered conversation betrayed her growing impatience with the throne she had never inherited. She saw the cracks in Commodus's armor and dreamed of exploiting them, imagining herself at the helm of an empire she believed she deserved. And yet for now, her moves were subtle, invisible to all but the most watchful eyes. Marcia, the emperor's mistress and confidant, offered her loyalty with the grace of a dove, but even her devotion carried a hidden weight. In her eyes, Commodus glimpsed secrets, choices, doubts, and loyalties that were not entirely his own. Every tender gesture, every whispered counsel was a double-edged blade, forcing him to navigate a labyrinth of trust and suspicion. To misstep would be to invite disaster, yet to confront would risk losing the fragile bond he relied upon. Even the trusted Gladiator, his companion in the sand, concealed truths that could shatter the emperor's world. Each glance, each silent conversation, carried the possibility of betrayal. The man who had once seemed unbreakably loyal now appeared as a mirror of Rome itself, brilliant and trustworthy on the surface, but filled with hidden currents beneath. The tension reached its apex with a failed assassination attempt, the first tangible proof that enemies were closer than he had imagined. Poisoned wine left untouched, daggers hidden in shadows. The danger was real, immediate, and terrifying. Commodus's mind, sharpened by years of performance and observation, raced through possibilities. Who had betrayed him? Which smiles concealed daggers? Every loyal ally became suspect, every familiar face a potential enemy. Fueled by fury and fear, Commodus resolved that the empire would pay for their treachery. No plot would go unanswered, no betrayal unpunished. And yet, in his heart, he knew that vengeance alone could not secure loyalty. He needed fear, awe, and spectacle, a way to remind Rome that he was both beloved and untouchable. The golden halls of the palace had become a theater of deception, the empire a game of shadows. Commodus, once a boy seeking applause, now ruled a kingdom riddled with lies, love, and betrayal. And in that intricate dance of loyalty and treachery, he understood one inescapable truth. In Rome, no blood was purer than ambition, and no trust could survive the hunger for power. Rome held its breath. The Colosseum, larger than any mortal could imagine, was packed to the brim, the air thick with anticipation, and the scent of sand and sweat. Commodus, now fully transformed from the boy who had craved applause into the emperor who demanded it, surveyed the crowd from his elevated seat, his eyes glittering with both pride and madness. Every cheer, every banner waving in the sun, was a note in the symphony of power he had composed, yet behind each roar lurked the whisper of betrayal, waiting to strike. Allies had turned into conspirators, friends had become strangers with knives hidden in their smiles. Even the trusted Gladiator, once his closest companion, had concealed the ultimate treachery, and Commodus had known that the day would come when loyalty could no longer be assumed. Tonight, the arena would decide not only his fate, but the fate of the empire he had built from admiration, fear, and blood. The games began with grandeur unmatched in history. Exotic beasts, armored gladiators, and flaming chariots moved across the sand in choreographed violence. Yet beneath the spectacle, Commodus's mind sharpened like a blade. Every movement in the crowd, every hesitant gesture among the senators, every exchanged glance was a potential threat. He saw the eyes of Lucilla, plotting still in silence, the gaze of Marcia, filled with unspoken secrets, And finally, the subtle movements of his former confidant, the Gladiator, now revealed as the architect of betrayal. When the final duel was called, Commodus entered the arena alone, stripped of armor that had once protected him physically, now relying solely on the aura of command he had cultivated for years. The crowd erupted at the sight of their emperor, a living god, standing against both man and fate itself. But as steel clashed and blood spilled, Commodus felt the cold realization of mortality settle in. This was more than a fight for spectacle. It was a battle for the soul of Rome. As the last opponent fell, Commodus turned to confront the betrayer, the man who had shared his victories and his trust. The confrontation was swift, brutal, and merciless, each movement a statement of authority and wrath. In that moment, the emperor became both executioner and victim, a god forced to taste the limitations of flesh and the sting of treachery. When the dust settled, the sand was painted red, the crowd roaring with a mixture of awe and horror. Rome had witnessed the rise and fall of a god in a single spectacle, and Commodus, standing amidst the echoes of betrayal and glory, understood the final truth. Power demanded sacrifice, loyalty was a fleeting illusion, and the empire, like the arena itself, was both stage and executioner. The man who had sought to be loved, admired, and feared had finally become legend, carved in equal measure from triumph and ruin. Rome would remember him not just as emperor, but as the gladiator who dared to defy gods, men, and destiny alike.